So, one of the exciting things about this podcast is not just doing history, but also including some of my other loves, such as fiddling, and combining the two. So, I'm going to not just talk about history on this website, but also combine the history of fiddling and the fiddling that goes along with it. Anyway, so these are a couple tunes from Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, an island in Canada that has a wonderful fiddling tradition. Now, I probably didn't do much justice to them because I was reading off sheet music, and something that fiddlers typically don't do is read sheet music, even though it goes against the way we were taught to read in classical tradition, always looking at the music, making bowing markings to match those of the stand partner and the rest of the orchestra. Fiddlers go off their ears, what they hear, their mind, what they know, and their soul, what they already feel. I didn't do those things, and you could hear there was something missing from the music. It wasn't just a spontaneous action that was happening. Today, I'm going to talk about a very famous fiddler. You might even say that he was revolutionary. His name was Neil Gow, and he was a Scottish fiddler in the 18th century. He was important to the Scottish tradition, which in turn was very important in developing the Cape Breton fiddle tradition, because many of the fiddlers in Cape Breton come from families that immigrated from Scotland. Now, if you know anything about Scottish history, you know who Robert Burns is. Robert Burns describes Neil Gow. Breakfast with Dr. Stewart. Neil Gow plays a short, stout-built, honest Highland figure, with his grayish hair shed on his honest social brow, an interesting face, marking strong sense, kind open-heartedness, mixed with unmistrusting simplicity, described in only the way a poet might be able to describe him. Now, he wasn't just a musician. Apparently, he taught himself how to play, which is really revolutionary, or at least inspiring to us today who might try to teach ourselves how to do things. Things are becoming a little more individualistic, and you can teach yourself a lot with the advent of YouTube, but it's not really teaching yourself if you're on YouTube. You're still getting advice from someone else. He apparently taught himself and started by winning a competition. And so he taught himself. It was not his only career. He was not just a fiddler, but he taught himself how to fiddle, and he won a competition. That was how he got his start. So now that had a distinctly Scottish flavor to it, and in large part, these kind of innovations were because of Neil Gow. He invented what is the uptick, something like that, in which you can launch into the next note. So in a classical style, it might just be. And in Scottish, you have a sort of launching off the bow. But you have to start the right phrasing. Anyway, so that's a poor impression of what he might have done, but you have a different style of bowing introduced from this sort of fiddler, and you could hear it a lot in the song I played at the beginning. So it might just be sound like any fiddle tune, maybe from Ireland, maybe from Scotland, but when you hear those important upticks, that's a legacy from Neil's career. Now, I've already said he was potentially the most revolutionary fiddler who invents this sort of amazing, powerful uptick that people just like in the dance halls, because that's where his work was being heard. He would play professionally, and word got out that he was a good fiddler, so he would play for years at dances and assemblies, and he was more expensive than other fiddlers at the time, yet he still asked for 15 shillings a gig. Now, that's not that much today, of course, and it's only about, from what I've read, only about £7 for an entire gig, and he'd also have to travel about 20 miles each way, which is not easy, needless to say, in the 18th century. And if you think about the weather in Scotland and the way it is getting around there, probably very difficult for Neil. Yet he had this marquee upstroke that people just wanted to hear, and he must have gotten some sort of joy from playing this, because he was willing to walk 20 miles to do it. Even if he had got no joy and it was just a job, we should be thankful, because he left us with some real gems. Now, people in the 18th century, as for the rest of history, have been moving around and interacting with each other, having cross-cultural exchanges. And word got out that Neil was good. People would come and see Neil from places on the British Isles you might expect, like London. But also travelers from abroad would make sure, if they were that far north, to go to an event in which he was playing. And one of the things they noticed was that he only played Scottish music, which for a continental European at the time might be pretty shocking to see someone so accomplished on his instrument, yet narrowly so. He was not like the great European violinists of the 18th century that would have to have a repertoire that reached out between nations. Instead, he was largely confined to the Highlands, whether by his destiny or his choice, doesn't really matter. And in such, he was able to create within the tradition an enormous lasting impact. People were shocked that someone could not only change the style with those up bows, and play, very good jigs and rowdy reels, but also have a beautiful amount of tone and timbre to play laments and beautiful funeral songs. So people also write about being very impressed by his slower music as well. Here's a piece that Neil wrote. Now, I purposefully accented and exaggerated the upticks because that's what he's so well known for. Now, of course, I'm over romanticizing in the end with the extra finish and vibrato. Who knows if Neil actually did those things, but with those upticks, it sure takes away the focus from the traditional turns and trills and ornaments that you know Scottish music for. Rather than focusing on the all those ornamentation, your focus, it really sets you up the up. It's not so much about the notes that come after. There's a breath, and then he attacks the next phrase. So there's a much more human feeling to Neil's music. Now, if you've made it this far through the podcast, thank you. And here's a completely unrelated tune to send you on your way and to reward you for listening along. Thanks for listening. See you again soon.